For many progressives, ending qualified immunity was the major point of the George Floyd Justice Act. Now we're hearing legislators in the United States Senate are removing qualified immunity as an option from the latest bill. Now, of course, qualified immunity protects law enforcement officers from civil accountability for wrongdoing. This protection affords officers escape from punishment when they commit crimes like murder, assault, theft while on duty. Now, advocates argue qualified immunity abolishes police accountability. What you also have, though, is you have police unions and others who say, no, it should remain in. Progressives say if qualified immunity is removed, they will not support this bill, which would cause leading to a death blow to what is already a tenuous situation. Joining us right now is Dr. Rashall Brackney, Charlottesville, Virginia Chief of Police. Glad to have you here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. So let's talk about this here because, again, all we heard last year in the wake of George Floyd's death, when this bill was put forth, ending qualified immunity was in the House bill. You've had this constant back and forth in the United States Senate. You've had others, many say, if you take this out, you really have no bill. Your thoughts?
So I don't think it's a binary, right? We always seem to think that things are either one or the other and that there's no room in between. I think what our citizens are asking for, the community is asking for, is a pathway forward to civil accountability when an officer does something that violates their constitutional rights. And they want it in such a way that it's not so strict or so narrow or so unique that no one can ever get civil. Remember that, civil relief, not necessarily criminal relief.
So, but the thing that we're dealing with here is that you have the unions, the sheriff's folks, others, they're fighting. They're saying, no, you cannot lose that. But what form of accountability do you have for police officers? Look, this has to get passed. You have folks on the right saying we're going to stand with these law enforcement officers. You have folks on the left who are saying you got to end police, you got to end qualified immunity. So what is the happy medium? Is there one?
Well, I actually think there is. And NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, of who I am a member, we say that the pathway forward may be that you remove the qualified immunity from the organizations itself. Most officers are going to be indemnified when there is a lawsuit or when there's a settlement. In other words, the organization, the municipality already pays that. So if the pathway forward is roll back those immunities from the municipality or the organization or the police department, you can still then leverage all of your rights or your pathways to get monetary relief, civil monetary relief through another way. And I think we should explore that a little more as we go forward, right? And there is some protections and reasons that they originally were put in place. But I think that they're so narrow that very few people ever can get any relief or justice by attempting to use a civil suit in which qualified immunity protections are leveraged or defense is leveraged.
But the thing that really jumps out here for so many people is that the onus is really on city councils and county governments having to pay these enormous penalties, and that many believe, again, that until officers are held personally accountable, then they're not going to necessarily change their behavior.
We'll say, I think there's two pathways forward to that. And the first one is we need a criminal legal system that is going to hold the officers accountable. The reason that there's this hue and cry for civil accountability is because there's no faith in the criminal legal system to hold officers accountable when they violate someone's constitutional rights. Very few prosecutions and very few convictions, if any. We see an anomaly or an outlier like George Floyd, and we see there's such relief that there was some sort of justice. But if you think about it, the monetary civil actions, and you're right, the municipalities settled in advance of these criminal charges going through the system and being fully adjudicated. So it should not be on the taxpayers' backs individually, but also if we're going to roll it back, there needs to be those concepts of how we do that for other politicians, other municipal and other federal and other government workers that may also are afforded those same protections.
But let's also be honest here. One of the reasons you do not have the criminal accountability is because the laws literally are set up to give police officers, wide latitude. And so very few DAs are loath to prosecute cops. Fewer grand juries are loath to prosecute them. In fact, just today, a judge threw out murder charges against some Hawaii police officers where a grand jury declined to indict them. The district attorney felt there should be a trial. They go to court. The judge says, not enough probable cause, charges thrown out. And so residents then say, my goodness, when do we ever actually see justice? I mean, in the case of George Floyd, that was one of the few cases where it went to actual trial.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. You will get no fight from me when we talk about police accountability. I just testified yesterday in front of the Virginia committee on that's advising the U.S. Commission on Human Rights and police accountability. And the systems that are currently in place do have a lot of gaps. And that is why people are railing against the system. And they've turned this moment into an actual movement, and not even just for police reform, right? The entire system needs to be reformed from the very beginning, from the entry point, from policing through prosecution, all the way through to our judges and our elected officials. And they are very representative of some of the problems that exist, whether it's the relationships that exist between them that are symbiotic and they rely on each other in order to get their work done. But the key has to be the continued high visibility and pressure to get something done. And I think that, again, the pathway forward is at least to start removing some of those protections from the municipal agencies as well, because then they'll have some responsibility and ownership as to who they hire. We look at some of these officers, they've been in front of their internal processes 10, 20, 30 times, and they still remain employed or still in that agency. It's because the municipality or the police department or the organization is shielded from those protections. So they're not invested in. They have no skin in the game under the same qualified immunity as that individual officer has.
All right, then. Well, we certainly appreciate it. We'll see what happens. Many folks wanted this bill to be signed on by the anniversary of the death of George Floyd. It is not the case. Here we are in August, and we still have no signs as to whether or not this bill is going to come up for a vote in the United States Senate. Dr. Brackney, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to go to my panel, Reese Colbert, Black Women Views, Dr. Greg Carr, Professor, Department of Afro-American Studies, Howard University. Also, we are joined by Adrian Irmer, Fellow, New Leaders Council, Chicago. Glad to have all three of you here. This is one of those things here, Greg, that we have to be very honest about in terms of what's going on here. The police folks we're going to fight this. That was always the case. Early, you heard Congressman Jim Clyburn saying that, hey, we could take this off the table if it means getting the bill passed. Here's the problem. You remove qualified immunity from the bill and it passes the Senate, there's no guarantee it's going to pass the House.
That's true. In fact, there's probably a guarantee that it doesn't. Greatly appreciated your interview with Dr. Brackney, with Chief Brackney, and the work of Noble. Because trapped in those blue uniforms are many Black and brown officers, officers of goodwill, officers who decided to join law enforcement because they wanted to protect their communities and serve their communities. And they are trapped by the white nationalists, by the Klan, by the white nationalist, white supremacist organizational logic of policing, which is about control and punishment. So we saw Tim Scott doing Tim Scott things again. He and Lindsey Graham last month met with the sheriffs, the National Sheriff's Association. And we saw after that he pulled back on his counteroffer to say, well, maybe you can have qualified immunity removed against the departments. And that's what we heard Dr. Brackney say. If you move it to the municipalities, the police departments, but that misses the essential point. It is a philosophy of lawlessness that organizes punishment in this country as it relates to the law. That means that officers literally have a license to kill, to beat, to steal, a license to shoot. And that is what they don't want removed. So after they met with the sheriffs, Senator Scott pulled that back. So I think that, in fact, the removal of qualified immunity, and of course, Congressman Clyburn initially said, doing Jim Clyburn things, that he could live without qualified immunity. That's the end of this legislation, brother.
Adrian, Chicago is one of those places where we've seen significant issues with cops. We saw Jason Van Dyke, who was convicted for the murder of Laquan McDonald, but we've seen a lot of pushback from cops there when they're being held accountable, and that's really what this boils down to. Many police officers do not want to be held accountable, and so the blue is an extremely powerful force in this country. And many people, when they sit on grand juries, they give cops wide latitude and tremendous benefit of the doubt when they are brought before a judge or jury in a trial.
No, absolutely. I mean, Chicago certainly isn't different than most other major jurisdictions across the country when it comes to a lack of police accountability and oversight. We recently had the passage of the Civilian Office for Police Accountability from City Council, which is earth-shattering and earth-rocking for Chicagoans, because this would literally be the first time citizens have an opportunity to chime in on the investigation and accountability process for officers in Chicago. So I'm very hopeful to see the future of this in the city. But I'm definitely going to agree with Dr. Carr. Absent the teeth in police reform, which is reforms to qualified immunity, repealing it altogether, the rest of the reforms are for headlines and to make people feel as though they've done something, but they're not substantive at all.
That's the thing right there that jumps out at us, Reese, and that is people want to see something done. Look, and the Floyd family made it perfectly clear that they were not going to be happy with just any bill. They wanted there to be substance in it.
Yeah, but I'm going to disagree with you all. And I've said time and time again that I don't understand why everything has to be this all-encompassing sweeping bill that solves 100% of all the problems. The fact is that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was hailed as the most comprehensive police reform bill that was ever created. This was held by many criminal justice reform experts and advocates. And so, yes, qualified immunity being stripped from this bill is a loss, but I would like to remind everybody that a lot of the things that actually spurred people getting out on the streets to protest, things like the no-knock warrants that led to Breonna Taylor's murder, is part of this bill. Also, ban on chokeholds, which is what ended up killing George Floyd, as well as others. So those are things that are still in this bill. A national police misconduct registry is still a part of this bill. Something like that would have potentially saved Tamir Rice from being killed by the cops that were actually had misconduct from other departments, but they're allowed to just go to another department and not report that kind of things. Also, the standard of which would for police are held to where they have to prove that they were reckless, as opposed to that they have to prove there's a higher standard that makes it almost impossible to convict these cops of any kind of wrongdoing. So it changes from was it reasonable, was it necessary, to was it reasonable. And so there is still a lot of wins in this bill. And if you don't get 100% of it, then have a standalone qualified immunity bill and try to get that through. But I'm just not of the mindset that, that without this, nothing else counts. And, I think that progressives tend to cherry pick one thing that they want to hang their hat on and say that this is the most important thing, this is the only important thing, and if that doesn't happen, this is worthless. And I just don't agree with that. I think that we have to get the wins where we can get the wins. We have to get the reforms where we can get the reforms. All or nothing is why we constantly end up with nothing. And in this case, I know that a lot of people feel like it's nothing without qualified immunity, but that only changes, to Dr. Brackney's point, the civil aspect, when there's a lot of things in here that changes the criminal aspect. And that's what's really letting these cops off the hook from any kind of criminal charges.
But the problem is we don't even know then what's going to come out of the United States Senate, and so we also don't know what else was taken out. And that's sort of where we are. I mean, early, 2 months ago, I was hearing that Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott were proclaiming, oh, they could bring 25 Republicans along. I don't see them. And so now here we're heading into September, and we still have no idea if there's even a bill that's actually going to come out of the Senate.
If there's no bill, then nothing gets accomplished, right? So, I mean, it's not just about qualified immunity accomplishing nothing. If that's out of it, nothing gets accomplished if there's no bill. But if you can get a bill that has at least some of these reforms in there, that is progress.
Well, no. And what I'm saying is we don't even know what else hasn't been taken out or else,
right,
or is what's included. And so that's also, so the deal. So I get that. I get the idea of having a bill, but you also want to know if look, there's some bills that get passed that frankly have no teeth. There's some
right,
bills that get passed that really are more ceremonial. The question is, will a bill get passed in the Senate, or are they going to put a bill up that actually has some teeth in it?
That is the question, absolutely. And I think when we see the full bill, we can evaluate it at that time for what it actually accomplishes. What I'm saying is I'm not willing to write off the criminal justice reform efforts entirely because of one specific thing, which I concede is a big deal. I'm not saying that it's not a big deal, but what I'm saying is I'm not willing to write it all off, given the other things that we know of were at least in the bill at some point. Now, if they're no longer in the bill, then we can judge it as a simply ceremonial bill, something like the Juneteenth signing. But if there is still a lot of these things that were championed, not just by the senators and the House of Representatives, but by actual criminal justice organizations and advocates and experts, then that's when I'll make my decision as to whether or not it's worth a damn. But until then, I'm going to withhold some judgment on whether or not anything will be accomplished.
All right, well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So I think we have to separate. There are two different things I think we're talking about. One, let's assume that everything that is currently in the bill except qualified immunity remains in the bill. I do agree that would make that bill better than the alternative. Even as we understand, at the end of June, the New York State Supreme Court struck down the New York banning the Eric Garner Act banning chokeholds for being unconstitutionally vague. We understand that if everything in the bill remains in the bill and is passed and goes to the president for signature and becomes law, that does not address the fact that without qualified immunity, a nationwide database will not result in not hiring the killers. It'll just make sure that the people realize that they have a staunch record of killing, robbing, and shooting before they hire them. It won't get rid of chokeholds. It will simply mean that the force that was applied will then go to the grand jury that won't indict, will go to the prosecutors that won't. The key to all the other reforms is striking the fear in the pocketbook of individual killers. Because as long as we are paying for that murder through lawsuits, and be very clear, if Minneapolis had not settled, George Floyd's family wouldn't get a dime, because the lack of qualified immunity, in fact, would mean that once the city says, come get us, and the court decides that there is no constitutional level of civil rights violation because the officer had that discretion, they are now precluded from going after Derek Chauvin. Let's be very clear. If everything in that bill remains, hey, I'm saying, hey, go ahead. Corey Bush has said, if we compromise, we die. It's not too far from the truth if you take out the one thing. They are not all equal. Qualified immunity, in fact, is the platform on which all the rest of those things rest. They're two different things, I think.
But Dr. Carr, I respect that. But one thing I will say is, I mean, we found that white supremacy is still profitable even outside of the system protecting it. Look at Cal Rittenhouse. He raised over $1 million for his bail. He's walking the streets free, not dead from selling Lucy's on the street, on the street like others are. So, I mean, there's always going to be a bailout for killers, for whether they're cops, whether they're white supremacists, white nationalists. So, I mean, in that case, we can never solve any of these issues. So, I mean, I agree we can, but I just think that there is some merit to what is being proposed. It's not going to solve everything, because at the end of the day, in this country, we have a white nationalist way of policing, and we've talked about that time and time again. But I'm just saying that there are some measures that can improve at least a little bit, and I know that that's not a lot, But I do think that it's worth at least acknowledging that if that does in fact pass.
Adrian, go ahead.
So from the legislative process, or from that perspective, if you don't get the teeth in the bill on the front end, you're going to have a very hard time going, if not impossible, getting them added via the amendment process. So that's why members of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in Congress, or the Democrats in Congress, are saying no. If it's not there, this bill does not do what we set out to do in drafting it. And I like I said, I agree with Dr. Carr in his assessment that if you remove the stick, the biggest stick in the bill, it no longer becomes a deterrent for terrible behavior in uniform. I don't disagree with you either, sis, in your assessment that there's always going to be a bailout for racists, because there are so many of them out there who want to use these folks as martyrs for their movement and continue to build momentum on their side of things. So you're not wrong in that. I just think that if we continue to take this mindset of these little teeny tiny wins are acceptable, then we'll never get the big stick ultimately.
Well, we're still waiting to see exactly what comes out of the U.S. Senate, and so we'll just have to wait and see. Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Folks, from Seek.com, black-owned company founded by Mary Spio. Folks, got a couple of products that's for our listeners and viewers. This is their VR headset where you can watch their content, 360-degree video, as well as virtual reality video. Just pop your phone right into here, close it up, and then you can see that VR content. They got different color VR headsets. This one is blue and white. Y'all Sigmas will love that one. Of course, I prefer the black and gold one. That's the one I have at the house. You also, of course, have their headphones. Greg, you'll like these here. They got the black and gold headphones, but Greg, you might like these all gold ones right here. You might like these right here. 360-degree sound as well. You can use this for gaming. You can use this, of course, for music as well, watching movies, all of that good stuff. Use the promo code RMVIP21, RMVIP21, if you want to actually get one of these two products. And of course, when you purchase them, the resources portion of that comes back to us here at Roland Martin Unfiltered.